Thank you everybody for being here today and for being online. So I'm Jenny McBurney. I'm a social sciences librarian and I work over at Wilson Library, and with me is Allison. She works at Walter Library, and so we're just going to give you kind of an overview. If you have questions at any point, feel free to interrupt. We also have a few different moments for some group discussion if that's something that you're excited about. If you have a question, just feel free. So I am gonna just quick give an outline of what we're gonna cover, and then I'll hand it over to Allison. And then she's gonna do an introduction to metrics just to kind of get everybody on the same page. She'll cover journal level and author level metrics, and then I'll talk more about other ways to measure your impact, including broader impacts and alt metrics. And then we'll also talk a little bit about scholarly identity, because that's an adjacent and very related topic that I think has a lot to offer. And then also we'll talk about getting support in the libraries and who you can contact. All right, I'll turn over to Allison.
So like Jenny said, I'm going to start us off with just an introduction to research metrics. So they are quantitative measures that are designed to help evaluate research outputs. Usually we're talking about bibliometrics, and this is quantitative analysis of publication data, usually related to citations to publications. There are seemingly endless number of metrics that people have developed, and they're each trying in their own special way to be more accurately capturing and quantifying citation patterns and then evidence of research impact. We always like to point out that metrics can only tell you so much about the quality, success, or impact of research or a researcher. They're really a way to measure the attention that something has gotten. They absolutely can't provide a simple answer to complex questions. The answer to what is life is not 4. And we see a great variation in use of and support of metrics across different disciplines. There are a lot of reasons why you might care about metrics. It is a way to understand the reach of your work. Sometimes you use them when you're making a case for promotion and tenure. Department 712 statements here sometimes specifically call out a metric. Sometimes they talk about things where they're essentially defining a metric that exists, but they don't use that actual word. We've seen in the CLA promotion and tenure guidelines this idea of expressing the relative stature of the place that you've published in, which seems to be kind of a weird shorthand for saying comparing the rejection rates for different articles, which is actually a very difficult number to get. And over the medical school, they are really into metrics, and they created their own system called Manifold to track metrics. You can use them, research metrics or other measures of impact, when you are applying for funding. In the libraries, we conducted a survey, and it says recently, but I'm now realizing that this actually went out 2 years ago. We've just been recently analyzing the data over the last 2 years. We surveyed faculty and researchers to ask them what they know about metrics and what their feelings about metrics. And in general, they're familiar with metrics and not at all familiar with alt metrics, which Jenny will talk about later. And then overall, they think that metrics are somewhat important to their department's administrators. There was definitely a lot of variation there, where the assistant professors thought that they were very important, and the full professors thought, no, they're not really that important. All right, journal level metrics. So the journal impact factor is probably one that everybody in the room has heard of. The official journal impact factor is something that you buy in the form of the journal citation reports, which is sold by a company that's now called Clarivate Analytics. And they are the people who make Web of Science, Web of Knowledge. They used to be Thomson Reuters, used to be ISI. And it's a measure of how often a journal's articles are cited. So you calculate it by taking the number of citations. So the journal impact factor is for a given year. So the impact factor for 2019 would be taking the number of citations in 2019 to things published in the 2 previous years, divided by the number of articles published in the 2 previous years. It's like deceptively simple, and that makes it very attractive to people. It is absolutely one of the most pervasive and influential metrics when you're looking at the quality of a journal. Like I said, it's just a simple ratio of 2 numbers. What does it really mean though? So we see here that the 2018 journal impact factor for science translational medicine was 17.161. My background is in engineering, and it kills me to see this going out to 3 decimal places, because based on the numbers there, they should only have 2 significant figures and it should be 17. But journal impact factors typically go out to 3 decimal places and really give you a false sense of their correctness. And they definitely can't be used to compare journals across disciplines. So in this example, Nature Reviews Genetics has an impact factor that's like 30 times American Historical Review, but you can't say that Nature Reviews Genetics is better than American Historical Reviews, because the people who would be publishing those are trying to accomplish completely different things. It also doesn't take into consideration the nature of the citation. So you could have people talking positively about your work, or you could have people talking very negatively about your work. If you think about perhaps the study that was linking vaccines to autism, it's been cited thousands of times, but a lot of the citations have been saying the study is junk. And so yes, that increases your journal impact factor, but what does that really mean? It's also relatively easy to manipulate, and that's because of the way that it's defined. It's really kind of odd, and I glossed over this when I was saying it, but you're dividing the number of items by the number of articles. Items can be anything. Articles would be your typical research article or maybe a review article. So one way to increase your journal impact factor would be to publish, say, some really controversial letters to the editor that get lots of citations elsewhere. So you're bumping up that top number, but you haven't made any change to the bottom number. What does that really mean about the quality of your journal? There has been a lot of people recognizing that journal impact factor has been abused. So back in 2012 at this meeting in San Francisco, a group of people got together and wrote the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. We just call that DORA. Currently, I have a hard time saying numbers out loud. 1,500 organizations have signed onto it, and it's a mixture of journals, publishers, funding agencies, institutions can sign on, and I believe that this one individual institutions or individual people can sign on as well. There's like 20 different parts to it, but basically what it says is don't use the GIF as a way to indicate the quality of a person or an individual article. There are a lot of people who have defined things similar to GIF or modifications to something like the GIF. Like I said, that one is one that you buy from Clarivate Analytics. The 1 through 3 here are available for free through the Scopus Journal Analyzer tool. In that case, they are based on data from the Scopus database, which is a subscription database. We have it here. It's owned by Elsevier. It's looking at a different set of publications than Web of Science does. They give their metrics for free to anyone. So you can look at the 5-year impact factor, which is a similar thing as the regular impact factor, just increasing the number of years. There is the SciMago journal rank, which is almost exactly identical to journal impact factor. People have tried to normalize things to make disciplines so that you can compare disciplines. One of those is the source normalized impact per paper. So here are some examples of these different metrics for that same set of journals. So we do see very close correlation for impact factor, 5-year impact factor. The SJR is a little bit lower in all of these cases. And then you do see in the SNP there's a smaller range for these titles, but we do still see that the ones that are more health science focused are getting higher numbers. And again, it doesn't mean that they're better. They're trying to serve different purposes. All right, author level metrics. So basically these are some sort of ratio combination of publications and citations to your work. A very simple one is average citations per publication. These are obviously going to be influenced by what discipline the person is in. Can also be influenced by their institution, the journals that they're publishing in, the country, the language that they're publishing in. H-index, have you all heard of H-index? Yeah, it's one of the most commonly used ones for individual people. It has the definition there. Jenny and I are both visual people, and so we need this image to be able to like understand it. So what you do is you plot out, and it's not the number of papers, it's just like an index of papers going out on the x-axis, starting at the number with the paper with the highest number of citations, and where the number of citations meets the number of papers, that's your H-index. So it's good in that it does require both productivity and impact, so you have to be continually doing work. It's not like you do one really highly cited paper and then 30 papers that don't have any citations because no one cares about them. And it's not easily influenced by one highly cited paper. As it could be if you were just taking the straight average number of citations per paper. It doesn't take into consideration the author's roles. So you might have 2 authors, you might have 50 authors, you might have a couple of hundred authors, depending on what discipline you are in and how much you actually played a role in that article can vary. It's an interesting metric because it can only ever go up, and because of that, it disadvantages early career researchers. They just haven't had as much time to publish, and their publications haven't had as much time to get cited. It absolutely can't be used to compare across disciplines, and different tools give you pretty drastically different results, which is what we're showing here. So we have 5 different researchers, science-y, social science-y people, and then the writing studies person, who might look at this and feel a little bit bad about themselves because their H-index is substantially lower, but that doesn't really mean anything because of the field that they're in. In general, Google Scholar's numbers will be higher. Scopus also, usually the number of citations is a little bit higher than in Web of Science, and again, that's because Web of Science is looking at a smaller pool of titles than Scopus is. We do see kind of the same similar spreads across the different disciplines. So you might look at this and think, oh, well, Google Scholar is the best. It gives me the highest number. It makes me feel the best about myself.
Or that it represents a broader array of journals.
So that could be true, but we've seen some really weird things with it. And that's because we don't know what Google Scholar is looking at. So it could be looking at all these journals that aren't being indexed in Scopus and Web of Science. It could also be, per the last bullet up here, looking at things like interviews with a researcher or number of publications. It can pull up all sorts of bizarre things that have your name attached to it but aren't things that you have published. So like I was saying, we don't know the pool of what it's looking at. There is little to no quality control in calculating those numbers. In some cases, you might have the same paper being counted multiple times, even though it's really just the one paper. So there are lots of people who have tried to modify the H-index to make it more accurate. Again, though, it's a quantitative measure. It's never going to accurately explain who you are as a researcher and what your research means. This is one that is popular in Manifold over in the medical school, so the HFL index. So you look only at the articles in which you are the first or last author. H5 is also pretty common, and again, that's one of those ones where you're trying to normalize for the length of the career. You also would be able to see like maybe somebody worked really hard, got tenure, and then slacked off. In those last 5 years, you would see that slacking off. You can do that, 5 years is pretty common, you can do that over any number of years. There's the M quotient, the I-10 index, the G index. I think there's also a C, an E, an O, an S. It's like everybody just keeps coming up with something to try to make it better. And I feel like you might be asking me this question soon. The H-index was only invented in like the 1990s, right? It hasn't been around all that long, and it is definitely well entrenched. So how can you improve your H-index? It's not easy. We like to say that you could just write some really interesting papers that other people want to cite. That's super easy to do. This is where going into claim your works in Google Scholar can help. So if you maintain the accuracy of your profiles in Scopus, Web of Science, and Google Scholar, you can get credit for all of those things that actually belong to you. And Jenny, I believe we'll talk about ORCID later? Yes, which is a very useful way. I know that I personally have publications from my previous life that are in all sorts of different formats of my name, like Allison A. Langham, Allison Langham, A.A. Langham, now Langham Petro. And with an ORCID ID, you can say that those are all mine. But we do think the H-index is kind of like your credit score. Like, there are the little things that you can do, and you might get a little bit of a bump, but it really just takes time to see the effects of these things. This is a sticker that was really popular a while back. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but I am more than my H-index, and yes, I firmly believe that I am more than my H-index, and you are too.
Okay, so other ways to demonstrate impact. One pretty common, or becoming increasingly common thing that people are talking about is altmetrics. And that survey that we did 2 years ago now that Allison mentioned, it sounded like altmetrics were not a thing that was super familiar to a lot of people on campus. And so we do just kind of want to get the word out, not necessarily that it's better than typical metrics, but just that it's an alternative that's out there. And so altmetrics is short for alternative metrics. And usually it's kind of more focused at the article level rather than the author level or the journal level. And so it's measuring things or looking at things like social media activity or media coverage. So like, is this something that people are talking about either on Twitter or in the news, or citations in policy documents that might be for organizations or governments, either local or state level or federal or anything like that. Those are all different ways that you could be measuring the impact of a particular work. And so some of the benefits, especially for the social media and the media coverage type activity, is the shorter time frame. So a lot of times the citation process can take a really long time, right? You publish your paper and then maybe after a couple years you've got a few citations just because of the length of time it takes for other people to read your article and then go write about it and then get their own articles published. Whereas you kind of know right away if people on Twitter, like if people are paying attention to your article and they're reading it and they think it's really great, maybe they're tweeting about it, maybe they're sharing it with their friends. So it's kind of a quick way of seeing, okay, is this something that is interesting people and that they're paying attention to? They can also help you demonstrate impact in both the social and scholarly realm. So that might be important depending on kind of what kind of work it is that you're doing. Maybe you really want to get word out to the community rather than just academia. And then also measuring the impact of different types of scholarly or creative outputs. So for example, data sets or visual arts. So a lot of times people will more frequently now kind of put their data set as well as the article, so the article and then the data set that it's based on, make both of those openly available so that people can see the data, kind of make their own conclusions from it. Then they can cite your data set as well as your article. You get more citations, yay. But just that there's all kinds of different types of scholarly output and that just like the standard article isn't the only way to go. And keeping in mind the ways that we can measure that impact. But of course, drawbacks. So some potential drawbacks are that there's a real lack of agreement on what, if any, of these metrics are the most valuable. They're very new, they're very squishy, we don't really know who's using what, when, so it's all just kind of like, if this feels like something that's useful for you, go ahead and use it. If it doesn't feel useful for you, don't use it. There's also kind of a lack of consistent adoption across disciplines and institutions, so just kind of saying the same thing, that there's not like a standard way of putting any of these into use. So there are a number of tools out there that can kind of help you find like mentions of yourself of your articles on Twitter or in the news or something like that. Of course, you might just stumble across that on your own because your friend saw it and forwards the article to you. But there's some tools out there. So this first box right here that is labeled the colors of the donut. So that is about a tool called Altmetric Explorer, and the donut, what they call the thing, the altmetric donut. The different colors are for different types of mentions. So for example, it looks like the purple is policy documents, the red is news, yellow is blogs, blue is Twitter. And so typically you would see that little image next to somebody's article, and you would kind of at a glance be able to see, oh, lots of people, it's mostly blue and a little bit yellow. So mainly people are talking about this on Twitter and on blogs. And you can see there's a whole ton of different things there, including, I think Google Plus is still on here, which, whoops, Google Plus is not a thing anymore, so we should probably get an updated photo. And then the number inside the donut is again, people are trying to oversimplify things and give you a number. And so that's supposed to be some sort of attention score. What does that really mean? How is that calculated? We don't really know. But that is what this company, this tool has decided to do, is to try and sum everything up with a number. And that is a really massive one. I've never seen an article in the wild with that kind of a number attached to it. So, yeah.
Is this something we have access to?
Yeah, so I will show in a few slides, I'll show an example that in Experts at Minnesota, it automatically will, if the data is available, it will automatically show the altmetric and the plum print, which I'll talk about next. And then there are a number of our databases that also kind of have it linked up. And so you would see that in, I want to say Scopus and a few different EBSCO databases. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but if you see it in a database, that's what it means. And there's a few places where it's used already. Yeah, so that's Altmetric Explorer. The other one over there, the plum print, yeah, that's embarrassing for me to say, plum print. So that's what that little icon is called. The company is called Plum Analytics. The size of the little dots indicates like the numbers, right? So the really big green dot means that this is getting a lot of usage, which in this case for them means PDF views. But you can see it's also capturing things like people are reading it, people are talking about it on social media, somebody has a citation for it in Crossref. And so for both of these things, typically if you see that icon, you can click on it and then see all of this more detailed information, and oftentimes even like go and see the tweets or whatever. And then this is an example, this is a pretend profile from a tool called Impact Story, which was the I more than my age index. That came from Impact Story. That's their little I logo. And so this is a tool where you can create yet another profile. I know, it's fine. You can create another profile for yourself, and this is a place where you can kind of keep track of more of those, what they're calling like achievements. And you can see that they've got like open hero, so you know somebody's reading your stuff online. Yay, global reach. People have been reading your stuff in 35 countries. So different little badges and things that you can do. So that has gotten some interest as well. We also wanted to make a mention of broader impacts. This is definitely coming from the science-y angle of things. And we'll kind of see where it goes. It's fairly new as a requirement, but the National Science Foundation is requesting that people describe their proposals for grants, their broader impacts, or what they're calling how well the proposed activity benefits society or advances desired societal outcomes. So that might be things like having people like women or people with disabilities or underrepresented minorities in STEM. You can kind of see a whole list of different things that they're trying to encourage. And so just as a few examples, here are some projects that have been used in, to try and make an argument for the broader impact that these works are having on society. So definitely some cool stuff that's happening. And we have a library guide here, which is available in the slides, and we'll give you that link again if you missed it at the beginning. And then there's examples of different broader impacts. I don't know a ton about this. I'm not the one who put the guide together, but we can try and answer any questions if that's something that is a thing that you have heard of or it's come up for you before. And definitely reach out to the libraries if you have questions about it. We can try to help. But it's relatively new. Okay, scholarly identity. So this one isn't exactly about metrics, but it's very intertwined, and that's why we wanted to talk about it, and that's why, of course, things like ResearchGate are coming up. So ORCID.org, ORCIDs are basically like the thing. Like if you walk out of today and you're like, gosh, what should I do like immediately after this session? You should get an ORCID if you don't already have one. Please get one. What it is a 16-digit number. So like there's mine. I just got a little screenshot from my profile, and so you can see it just has a little orchid.org / and then the number. So it's a persistent identifier. It's unique to me. or yours will be unique to you. Basically, I like to think of it as like a social security number for your research and not a secret. Everybody can use it to find you. So this is really helpful, especially if you are for name disambiguation. So if you have ever published under different names, like Allison was saying, like if you used your middle initial one time and then not another time, or you changed your last name, or maybe you changed institutions, and you want to make sure that you are getting credit for all of the work that you've done, and also that other people know that yes, all these different names are the same person. This is the perfect way to solve that problem. You can use it in both manuscript and grant submissions. It's becoming increasingly common for granting funding agencies, and a lot of different journals are requesting it, and some are even starting to require that you have an ORCID when you make a submission. And then also it plays nicely with a lot of the other tools that we're often using. So things like Scopus, Experts at Minnesota, if you have a profile, it integrates with those things. You can push and pull information between those different platforms, and just kind of help you get everything to like stay up to date and be accurate, which like Allison was telling us is an important way for making sure that all of your H-index stats are all looking tidy. So here's a quick little map of kind of the ecosystem at the U currently. You can connect your ORCID to your My account in My U. You can also connect it to Experts at Minnesota and to Works. And you can see here kind of what the path of how that might look. So for example, if I had all these pieces connected, and I submitted a manuscript and I included my ORCID ID, and it was a journal that just kind of automatically did all that great stuff in the background, then when I submitted it, it would automatically get pushed to ORCID, and then from ORCID it could get pushed to my Experts at Minnesota profile or my Works if I wanted to. So it's just really nice way to keep things sort of automated and updated. The thing is that you have to go into all of those and turn it on. Basically, you have to enable it in each of these different tools to be able to do that. And I left Manifold on there for the medical school just as an FYI, but that probably doesn't impact anybody in this room or listening online right now. So, in addition to just being the little number, an ORCID can also come along with having another one of those profiles. But in this case, I don't think it's a bad profile. You don't have to have a ton of information on there. But this is an example of what my profile looks like, and it might be a little bit small, but you can see there's a section on the side with my name and my ORCID ID number. Then there's a section with also known as and all the different like name variations I've ever used, so you can figure out, yep, all of these are Jenny. Different websites, so like I have a link to my experts page, and other IDs, I have a link to my Scopus author page. And then under the Works, you can just see all the different things that have been put into my ORCID profile. Some of these are pushing from Experts because that's where I happen to enter them. Some of them are automatically coming from like Crossref or Scopus or whatever. So it's super easy to get stuff in. You can kind of import things, but you don't have to maintain this profile in order to have an ORCID ID. So if this irritates you, just skip it and just use the number itself, and that'll be just fine. Any questions about ORCID? You should get one. Who already has an ORCID? Yay, a few people. Good job. Everybody else, you should get one. Especially grad students, if you or you know grad students. If you're a grad student or if you know somebody, because it's really great for when you're moving institutions in the future.
There's not a lot of integration with funding agencies and grants yet, but it's
sure.
coming. It's clear that it is coming.
This is the way of the future. We also wanted to give a highlight to Experts at Minnesota. So depending on your position here, you might already have a profile, or this might be something that you would have in the future. But basically, what most people are familiar with is the public-facing profiles at experts.umn.edu. The benefit of these profiles is that they're super Googleable. It's really easy for people to find you. We get bumped up pretty high because it's kind of the University of Minnesota level information. And it's automatically populating with data from HR, from SPA, so like some of your grant stuff that is going through that, and then from Scopus. So of course that's going to work better for some people and less well for other people because not everybody's works are indexed in Scopus, but at least it's a starting point. And then there are a lot of different import options that you can use where you just like type in your name, click import from like an EBSCO database, and it will find the articles that you have indexed in that particular database. So you can get a lot of information in there fairly quickly. If you add a photo, it looks cute. This is our colleague, Caitlin. She kindly let me use screenshots from her profile. But what I really wanted to point out is that when you kind of have your list of your research outputs, whether those are articles or book chapters or whatever, you can see over on the side for articles where this is applicable, so not everything. But Caitlin has little plum prints and little altmetric donuts, and then if this was a live screen, you could click on those and get more information about, oh, who's talking about this research. So that's what that kind of looks like in the wild. And I already mentioned that you can import these things if they're not automatically showing up in your profile. And the other cool thing that experts can do to kind of help demonstrate impact, just in another small way, is that it has this network map of collaborators that kind of automatically will show up on your profile. So this maybe doesn't work so great for people like me who have not done any cool international collaborations. But if you have, maybe that's a kind of interesting and unique way to sort of display that information and let people know about that cool work that you've done. So ResearchGate, that is another profiling system. A little bit of information here about how it's free to sign up. But again, you're kind of giving your data to this for-profit corporation. I guess basically you can kind of keep track of like who's reading your stuff and who's looking at your profile, and you can follow other people, very much like Facebook. Some people have gotten in a little bit of trouble or issues with uploading copies of papers that they don't actually have copyright to, so just be a little bit wary of the stuff that you might be finding that's hosted on there. Yeah, so academia.edu, I've already complained about the .edu. That really irritates me. So very similar thing, again, I think it probably, the value of these things for you maybe depends on like how widely is it being used currently, like in your field and other people doing really similar research to you. Like if everybody's on there, I'm not gonna say like you shouldn't be on there because maybe you'll miss out on something. But that's not my favorite. Your liaison librarians.
So can I just
Yes.
jump in here, a comment from online?
Yeah.
Someone says, a faculty member says, I use ResearchGate to share my work with folks in other countries who don't have access to the same databases, and she gets contacted several times a week.
That's a super great example. Yeah. So if you're trying to work with people who literally do not have the same level of access that maybe we can get here.
And there's a difference between posting your paper on there so that anybody can get it, or telling people, I can give you this paper, because most publishers will allow you to share person-to-person copies of your paper, so that is legal.
She just said share it privately.
Yep.
Yeah, that's legal.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a really great example, actually. We'll have to remember that for next time we do this. Other online comments, or
Nope.
Doing good? Okay. So we definitely want you to remember that you have amazing liaison librarians. One of them, Kim, is right here with us today. And then Amy and Scott are also great. And so you can see here all the different departments that they're liaisons to. I hope I haven't forgotten anybody on here, but let me know if you're not sure who your liaison is. But you should definitely reach out to them. We're kind of talking at like a big, high level, what are metrics, what are people using them for, what are people thinking across disciplines, but things might be really different in your specific niche area or your field. And so if you can talk with your librarian, they can bring us in, they will already have a lot of like really subject specific information available, so definitely reach out to them for assistance on any of these questions or other things that you think the libraries might be able to help you with. And then here's my contact info and Allison's, and you're certainly welcome to reach out to us with any questions that you have after this session if things are kind of whirling around in your brain and you want to reach out to talk more about it. Again, your subject liaisons, there's a list there. On the library website, we have a ton of different pages that cover a lot of these topics and more. So here's just some links that you can take a look at your leisure. We also have a link to a handout. I'm just calling it the impact handout here. It was originally created for CLA, but I looked through it and I think it's extremely applicable to, any social science disciplines. It was requested kind of for the tenure and promotion process for the committees that were kind of doing some of that evaluation, and so there's some stuff in there about impact factor and age index because that was what they really wanted us to make sure we included. But we also tried to temper that a little bit with like, don't forget that these aren't the only things that are out there. There's other ways to demonstrate your impact. You should always be thinking about what's really going to work for you and telling your own story. So I think that just gives you a little bit of a taste there. And then there's info for getting help with experts at Minnesota too. So I think we have just a couple minutes if you have any questions. Otherwise, here's the link to the slides again, and we're happy to hang out and chat. Thank you for listening.